fishing man out on the lake. All you need is a line and a pole that'll never break.
Hey there, Rednecks Preppies, Redneck Preppies. It's me, the Redneck Preppy. How you doing today? Great? Good. If you're a new angler, or even if you aren't, you may have heard the terms structure and cover and not been sure what's being talked about, or thinking that they're basically synonyms for each other. I've even heard relatively experienced anglers making the same mistake when talking about the subject. Today, I'll explain the differences between the two. Very simply, structure is essentially the bottom surface of the lake. Cover is virtually everything that's on top of that bottom surface. Let's look at structure first. A lake structure can be fairly simple. Think of a lake which is in essence a big bowl, something like Florida's Lake Okeechobee. It generally has sides that slope in gradually and culminates in a relatively flat bottom. The changes in depth aren't severe, and there's not much in the way of features. Now that said, you can also have a very complex lake structure, one where the topography, that's depth, of the lake can vary wildly, having everything from gradual slopes downwards to sudden drop-offs and everything in between. You can also have underwater features like submerged river and creek beds, bars, humps, points, you name it. As I said before, cover is that which sits on top of the bottom surface. So that includes things like vegetation, rocks, submerged or floating logs, docks, lily pads, or beaver huts. Heck, it's a shopping cart thrown into a lake. If it's on top of the bottom surface, it's generally regarded as cover. If you want an easy way to remember the difference between the two, look at it this way. Structure is the neighborhood, cover are the houses in that neighborhood that the fish live in. Well, thanks for joining me today, and as always, I hope... What? More? Fine. Okay, so now that you know the difference, here's why the two are important. When it comes to structure, if you know what you're looking for, you can find promising areas to fish just from seeing subsurface details. You can look at hydrographic maps, that's the underwater version of the topographic map that you're probably more familiar with, and spot places where fish are likely to eat, travel from one area to another, or just sit at various times of the day, month, and even year. Hell, you might just be slowly passing by and see something in the water. Now, one example are underwater humps or saddles. Those are places where you can often find schools of fish. Some species of fish love to hold on, let's say, a ledge just above sudden drop-offs, where they can come up to shallow water to feed and then go down deeper to avoid predators. So understanding structure is a great way to figure out, in a general sense, where fish you want to catch may be. So what about cover? Well, like I said before, cover is essentially anything that's on top of the bottom lake surface, and rarely has something lived up to its name so well. As it suggests, cover in a lake provides, cover for fish and other aquatic species that's preyed upon by other larger fish and aquatic species. Within cover, you can often find things like small fish, larvae, invertebrates, amphibians, and insects. Because of that, naturally, fish tend to feed at or near cover. Many fish, large or small, also tend to spawn in or near cover. Typically, the more cover a lake has, the healthier its ecosystem is. Now, although it seems like I'm kind of implying that cover is a shoreline feature, you can find cover anywhere in a lake and fish located at or near them. For example, fish might utilize cover found at deeper depths in the middle of summer to escape the warmer water. Okay, so now you know what structure and cover are. How do you use them? Well, here is where it can get complex. You could conceivably use one, the other, or both in concert to locate prime fishing areas. Let's use bass fishing as an example. Now, finding bass at cover shouldn't be a huge surprise to you. Both large and smallmouth bass can often be found at or near cover. We've all seen the awesome footage of anglers pulling out huge donkeys out of heavy vegetation. But bass can also be located on structure as well. Earlier I mentioned saddles and underwater humps, and no surprise, you can often find bass located at those features. The fish often stack up there, using it as a waypoint or a feed station as they make their way around a body of water. But how do you use them together? Well, again, in the example of bass fishing, anglers have an old saying that for the best chance of catching lunkers, you need to find the spot on the spot. So to pull our two examples together, if you're graphing a lake bottom and happen to see a promising hump on the bottom near you, but notice some vegetation growing on one side of it, that's probably the spot where you want to be throwing your lure. You've combined structure and cover. There may be small fish located in the vegetation taking refuge from shoreline heat, and that fact and the hump may serve as a beacon to larger fish. Now that, I will admit, is a pretty obvious example. Another might be vegetation or some kind of other cover located running along a depth line. Fish, whether a lone wolf or a school, could be traveling along that depth line and looking for their next meal. Anyone fishing docks isn't going to be surprised to find out that you can often find sizable fish sitting right at the pilings. There's an old rule of thumb, and I'll admit that I don't know how based in reality it really is, that 20% of the water contains 80% of the fish. Now, even if the numbers are off, I'd say that most game fish in any given lake are concentrated in a relatively limited space. That space is more often than not going to be those prime areas of structure and cover where their food sources are going to be. If you go into a lake doing some study, looking at hydrographic maps or charting the bottom, if your boat has one of them fancy sonar fish finders, you can probably pick out some good spots before you even hit the lake. Which is more important though? Well, a high-level angler is going to say both. And they're right. But if you're someone who doesn't have the time for the exhaustive lake studies that pros undertake even before they hit the water, I'd say concentrate your time on the cover. Preferably on the side of the lake which gets warmer in the morning first. Areas of rock and vegetation are pretty good spots to try out. That said, on a lake like the aforementioned Okeechobee, you're blessed with nothing but vegetation. That's when you have to start figuring out the spot within the spot on cover. That is a whole ball of wax for another video. This video wasn't meant to be an exhaustive look at structure, cover, and the potentially complex interplay between the two of them. More of a dip your toe in the subject matter if you haven't thought about it before. That said, if you start to learn how to read structure and cover, you can't help but catch more fish. Some good resources for lake study if you want to be one of us annoying people who starts railing away at length about this stuff are things like lake maps for the underwater stuff and things like satellite maps, stuff like Google Maps, for example, for cover. In the latter's case, you can often find multiple seasons and years worth of maps for a body of water where you can see the ebb and flow of changes. Depending on water level changes, you might even be able to spot areas of interesting structure. Combine that with your own notes and underwater mapping, if you do that, and you'll build up some pretty impressive knowledge about cover and structure on the lakes that you fish. At any rate, I hope you found today's video to at least be vaguely entertaining and mildly informative. As always, I hope your lines are always tight. Just stay away from my productive spots. Take care, and bye-bye.